In November 1959, the monsoon rains falling upon Hong Kong covered the city like a gray curtain. At the summit of Victoria Peak, in the lower floor of a mansion quite far from the city's crowd and poverty, one of history's most secret witnessings was about to take place. Under dim lights, a professional boxing ring rising in the middle of the room stood almost like a sacrificial altar. In the air, there was the smell of humidity, old leather, and Lord Stirling's expensive tobacco. In this ring, what was about to happen would remain under the weight of £1 million and a silence contract for 60 years. There were 5 men in the room. 5 men. Master Ip Man, the British industrial giant Lord Stirling, his right hand Arthur, and Captain Miller, a former SAS commando who had killed men with his hands in the jungles, and a servant sworn to maintain his silence. 2 weeks ago, Yip Man was in a quite difficult period. He had been unable to pay the taxes of the school he owned, and the students who came to his lessons had stopped coming. He could not earn money, and his honor was constantly being bruised by other schools. Economic difficulties on one hand, and the pressures of other schools on the other, were dragging him gradually into a dead end. He wanted to invest in a branch of art. Among these martial arts which were quite popular, he chose Ip Man's martial art, and then called him to his mansion. What Ip Man made was not just a courtesy visit, but a survival exam. The meeting had started in the mansion's high-ceilinged library. While Ip Man, in his traditional black clothes, sipped the Earl Grey tea offered by Lord Stirling, it was impossible not to notice the giant shadow standing right behind Stirling. Captain Miller. Miller was a 1.95-meter tall, 110-kilogram mass of flesh and bone who had survived the bloody conflicts in Korea and Malaya. His neck was as thick as a bull's, and his eyes were the reflection of violence and anger. Stirling took a deep breath from his pipe and said, "Master Ip, I have heard the legends told about you in Hong Kong. They are quite exciting and curiosity-arousing. It is as if you do not fight but almost dance while performing your sport. And I have heard that you have no fight yet where you have been defeated. I called you here because there is an investment I want to make, and I want to make this to a school hosting one of the popular martial arts. And I see that your fame is quite suitable for this," he said. He turned his gaze to the giant man behind him. Men like Captain Miller say that real war is won not with elegant hand movements, but with savage force and absolute violence. Ip Man slowly left the tea glass on the table. On his face, there was a stagnant expression. "My lord," he said with a calm voice, "real power is not a storm uprooting trees from their roots, but the wind gliding through the gaps between the leaves of those trees and continuing on its way. Wing Chun is not a show, but a science of survival." These words caused Miller to burst into a cynical laugh. Miller took a step forward. The wooden parquets on the floor groaned under his weight. "Science? I fought in the jungles of Malaysia, in that darkness where there were seconds to tear apart the throat of the man across from me. Those thin arms and elegant posture of yours will break at a boxer's first serious punch. You are a teacher, and I am a warrior. That is the difference between us." A glow appeared in Stirling's eyes. This was exactly the conflict he was expecting. "Then let us clarify this," said Stirling. "We will conduct a duel in the ring below. Master, if you can stay on your feet for only 5 minutes against Captain Miller, I will cover the 10-year expenses of your school and finance all your projects in Hong Kong. However, this is not a sports competition. Miller will fight like a real warrior, and do not worry, everything that happens inside will remain in that room forever." When they descended to the ring below, the tension in the environment increased considerably. Ip Man went up to the ring with his black cloth shoes. He was as silent and calm as a cat. He was watching his opponent and analyzing his movements. Across from him, Miller stood like a giant, his upper body naked, his chest and arms full of the scars left by war. Stirling and Arthur took their places right next to the ring. The moment Stirling said "begin," Miller moved like a bolt of lightning. His strategy was clear: to use the weight class difference, to squeeze Ip Man into the ropes of the ring, and to crush his head by using it like a sledgehammer. Miller made the opening with a harsh boxing combination coming from SAS training. The first punch tearing through the air passed only millimeters away from Ip Man's ear. Ip Man had shifted his head at only a minimal angle. Miller threw the second and third punches with anger. However, Ip Man was not there. The master was applying the centerline theory of Wing Chun. His body was turning around an axis, and Miller's giant energy was going to waste. At the 5th second, Miller pounced upon Ip Man like a bull. However, at that moment, Ip Man's arms rose like vines. He tied Miller's arms with Tan Sao and Bong Sao techniques. This was the famous sticking hands, Chi Sao technique of Wing Chun. Miller realized that no matter how much force he applied, his punches were being diverted outward before reaching Ip Man's body. A few seconds later, Ip Man started his first counterattack. While Miller was preparing to swing a kick by widening his guard, Ip Man caught that fraction of a second when his balance was disturbed. Chain punches. Lin Wan Kuan, working almost like the pistons of a machine, began to land on Miller's ribcage. Every single hit was almost breaking Miller's ribcage. Miller staggered backward. All the air in his lungs had emptied in an instant. His eyes were wide open in astonishment. Miller did not give up with the instinct of a professional killer. A heavier war was waiting for him. Clenching his teeth, he tried to wrap around Ip Man's waist with all his strength and throw him to the ground. With his wrestling experience, he was planning to squeeze Ip Man until breaking his bones. However, Ip Man flowed like water. While slipping through Miller's arms, he put Miller into shock with a strike of his elbow toward Miller's temple. If he had increased the severity of his hit a little more, Miller could have died. Ip Man almost took away all of Miller's respect with the strikes he hit him. By the time they reached the 12th second, Miller was no longer a warrior, but a prey in panic. All the killing techniques he had learned throughout his life had melted away against this weak man. With one last hope, Miller threw a giant right direct. Instead of meeting the punch, Ip Man leapt forward. Passing under Miller's arm, he entered his center and delivered a short, explosive blow under Miller's chin with his palm. Miller's feet were cut off the ground, and his giant body collapsed to the ground by hitting the ropes of the ring. The total time was exactly 17 seconds. Sterling noticed that his fingers were trembling when he stopped the stopwatch in his hand. Miller was lying on the ground, on his knees, out of breath with the weight of a defeat he tasted for the first time in his life. Sterling was quite astonished. Seeing his guard like that made him think that he would not be able to protect him enough when faced with the danger of death. And his trust in Miller was destroyed. He looked at Ip Man. Ip Man, on the other hand, was standing in the middle of the ring as if he had never fought at all. His breath was quite controlled and calm. Sterling's head became thoroughly confused, as if the person who fought in front of a giant man just a moment ago was not him. He was quite impressed by what he saw. Now he understood more clearly. He knew now why Ip Man was called the Master of Masters. Ip Man brushed away the faint dust particles on his black clothes with his hand and extended his hand to Miller. Miller looked first at that thin, callus-free hand, then at his own giant hands. After a moment of hesitation, he extended his hand, and Ip Man pulled him to his feet. There was a deadly silence in the room. Lord Sterling entered inside the ring and bowed slightly with respect before Ip Man. "What I have seen," said Sterling with his voice trembling, "was not just a fight, but like an experiment in the laws of physics. Master Ip, you used Miller's power as a weapon against him. This is a priceless talent. I am almost fascinated. To tell the truth, I was not expecting this much. However, I see that you rightfully carry all the master titles bestowed upon you." And immediately after, Sterling's voice was a bit more determined. "Arthur, bring the documents." Arthur took out a heavy contract prepared in 5 copies from inside a leather bag. "This check," said Sterling, handing a £1 million banknote to Ip Man. "This check is the future of your school and your students. However, This signature is the price of your soul and your witnessing. Every second, every punch lived here today, and Miller's state in this ring will be considered non-existent from the moment you walk out of this door. If a single word leaks out, I will not leave even a shadow for you to take refuge in within Hong Kong. Sterling cast a harsh look at Miller. Ip Man looked at the contract. He was not someone who would chase ghosts like being called a hero or boasting about defeating a British man. His only goal was to prevent Wing Chun from disappearing and to pass this art on to future generations. Legends grow not by people telling them, but by the silence of the truth, my lord, he said, and taking the pen in his hand, he signed. All 5 men signed that contract that night. Captain Miller gave his resignation from the army the next day and returned to England and never fought with anyone again. With the effect of the lesson he received, he began to live with his family in his small house. His daughter and wife enabled him to reach the emotions behind his harsh physique, and they discovered the more beautiful sides of life together. Lord Sterling made his investment and became the secret patron of Wing Chun, but he never mentioned this event in any business meeting. Ip Man, on the other hand, returned to his school and continued his trainings as if nothing had happened that night. Years later, while Ip Man's most famous student Bruce Lee was challenging the world, people saw the power of Wing Chun in movies. But no one knew how the greatest victory of this art in real life was buried under a £1 million secrecy contract at Victoria Peak. 17 seconds, 5 witnesses, 1 big secret. Legends are sometimes built not in daylight, but in the darkest and most expensive rooms of history. This story is the very truth itself that should have never been told.